Well then, you're gonna need friends. But if you won't join our kind, then you can't know where we live.
No. No.
Super mutants have always been introduced like a warning sign, big, loud, and violent, like Fallout's way of saying don't go down that road. But the truth is, the scariest super mutants aren't really the ones that scream. The scariest ones are the ones that remember, because the moment a super mutant looks at you and talks like a person, that's when you realize something you can't unsee. This isn't a creature. This is a human being that got converted into evidence, a walking reminder of what the old world was willing to do when it had money, power, and a reason. And that's why the Fallout show finally treating super mutants like a real concept matters. Not just as new enemies, but as a signal. Because once super mutants show up in the story properly, the Fallout world stops being post-apocalypse survival and turns into something darker. A world where the apocalypse didn't end the experiments, it just made them easier to hide. So today we're answering the real question. Not what do super mutants look like? Not why are they strong? The real question is, what are super mutants actually supposed to mean in Fallout? Where do they come from? Why do they exist? Why do they keep showing up in every era of Fallout lore? And why does the franchise keep using them like a moral punch to the throat? Let's break it all down. Super mutants begin with 3 letters Fallout fans treat like a horror movie title. FEV, the Forced Evolutionary Virus. And that middle word is the whole story. This was never nature doing what nature does. This was never radiation gone wrong. This is the exact opposite. This is design. Before the bombs fell, the US military wanted a solution to a problem that always shows up in war. Human bodies break, they get tired, they get sick, they bleed, they die. And the goal wasn't just to protect soldiers, the goal was to create something that could keep moving even when the world collapses. Something that doesn't crack under pressure. So imagine a pre-war meeting where someone says, what if we could upgrade the human system like software? Not train humans harder, not equip them better, rewrite the code. That's what FEV is, a man-made mutation engine, and Fallout never hides what it's connected to. West Tech, military research, and the kind of facilities you don't find on a map. By the time we hit 2077, FEV wasn't a theory anymore. It was active, and part of that progress included the thing every dystopia eventually does, human testing. Then the Great War hits, the world ends, but the virus doesn't, because Fallout's version of evil doesn't die in the blast. It survives underground and comes back later. And that's why super mutants don't feel like random monsters. They feel like the future returning to collect a debt. When Fallout wants you to understand something is evil, it doesn't just tell you, it makes it visual. And the most infamous super mutant creation method is also one of the ugliest things the series ever came up with: dipping. It's exactly what it sounds like. A human being gets submerged in FEV like an object being processed. Not treated, not healed, processed. That detail is important because it tells you how the old world saw people, not as souls, as materials. This concept explodes in the original Fallout with the Master, one of the most defining villains the franchise ever created, because the Master doesn't just stumble into super mutants. He builds an ideology around them. His belief is simple, and that's what makes it terrifying. Humanity failed. Humanity fractures. Humanity destroys itself. So his plan is to forcibly convert humanity into one unified species, a species that can survive the wasteland because it's physically built for it. It sounds almost noble until you remember the process requires kidnapping, violence, and erasing people. And then Fallout hits you with the fatal flaw. Super mutants can't reproduce. They're sterile, which means they can't replace humanity naturally. They can only expand by taking more humans and converting them the hard way. So every single super mutant you see is proof that somebody got stolen, somebody had a life, somebody had a name, and that's what makes the idea so horrific. Super mutants aren't born, they're made. Now here's where super mutants become really interesting, because Fallout doesn't treat them like a single species. It treats them like the result of different batches of the same nightmare. Some super mutants are articulate. They can reason, negotiate, reflect. Others are blunt, aggressive, childlike, unstable. And that difference matters, because it tells us something about FEV. It's not a clean upgrade, it's a violent rewrite. And what you get depends on variables Fallout loves to play with. What strain of FEV was used, how the subject's body was before exposure radiation levels age, and the conditions of the facility doing it. Fallout lore often ties better outcomes to subjects who were cleaner, less radiation damage, less wasteland corrosion, and that's why certain groups obsess over vault dwellers or protected populations, because it means the best super mutants come from the people who were sheltered, which is a disgusting irony. The safest people in Fallout become the best raw materials, so when you see a super mutant who can speak like a person, it's not just cool writing, it's Fallout showing you that the monster has a spectrum. Some of them are basically walking war machines. Some of them are human beings trapped inside an altered body, and that brings us to what the mutation actually does. On the surface, super mutants are simple. They're huge. The muscle density is extreme. The skeleton thickens, skin toughens, and Fallout tends to frame them like living armored vehicles, and that's the point. FEV wasn't designed to create beauty, it was designed to create survivability. A body that can handle harsh radiation infection wounds, hunger, extreme environments. That's why they shrug off damage that would end a human instantly. That's why they carry heavy weapons like toys. That's why even when you kill one, it never feels easy, because you're not fighting a person, you're fighting a person whose body has been rebuilt into a battlefield platform. But here's the part Fallout always sneaks in. The transformation isn't clean. It's not a superhero glow up. It's body horror. Faces warp, voices fracture. The body becomes something the person inside didn't recognize. And imagine waking up after that. Imagine realizing your entire identity now exists inside a shape the world hates on sight. The biggest misconception about super mutants is that they're dumb. Fallout doesn't say that. Fallout says something worse. They're damaged. Sometimes the mutation disrupts memory and reasoning. Sometimes it reduces emotional range. Sometimes it locks them into aggression because that's what survival demanded. And sometimes it leaves them intelligent enough to understand exactly what happened to them, which is arguably the cruelest outcome. Because if you're a super mutant who remembers your old life, then every mirror is violence. Every interaction with humans is a reminder you've been exiled from your own species. And when the wasteland treats you as a monster no matter what, a lot of super mutants stop trying. Not because they were born evil, because the world only gave them one role. Think about Fallout's creature roster. Deathclaws feel like predators that escape control. Rad scorpions feel like nature turned to nightmare. Feral ghouls feel like time, plus radiation, plus tragedy. But super mutants feel different. They feel like an industrial product, and they are. Because every super mutant is the end result of a process that required a lab, a plan, a chain of command, and people who signed off on human suffering. That's why they carry so much thematic weight. They aren't the wasteland gone wrong. They're the old world continuing its crimes after death. Fallout's timeline is wide, and super mutants show up in different forms because they weren't created only once. They were created again and again and again. West Coast super mutants often feel more organized, more capable of society, because the master needed structure for his unity plan. Fallout 3 gives us one of the bleakest origins, Vault 87, a vault that wasn't protection. It was a factory, a shelter that existed to turn its own people into super mutants. Which makes Vault 87 one of the darkest jokes Fallout ever wrote. A vault is supposed to save you from the apocalypse, and instead it makes you into the apocalypse. Fallout 4 goes even further by revealing the Institute was experimenting with FEV, turning abducted people into super mutants, and then dumping them into the wasteland once the data was extracted. Which makes Commonwealth super mutants even more disturbing. They weren't migrating, they weren't ancient, they were manufactured locally and disposed of like failed prototypes. That's Fallout in a sentence. Create the monster. Lose control of the monster. Pretend the monster is the problem. Now, here's where Fallout does something special. It refuses to let super mutants be one note. Because in New Vegas, we get Jacobstown, a settlement built as a refuge. And the most important part, it treats super mutants like survivors, not targets. And its leader, Marcus, isn't framed like a villain. He's framed like an exhausted soldier who's tired of being hunted for existing. Jacobstown exists to prove something vital. Super mutants aren't automatically evil. A lot of them are just stuck. And when they're given stability, some of them become something the wasteland never expected, a community. Then Fallout adds an extra layer of horror with nightkin. Nightkin are super mutants altered by heavy stealth boy usage, the tech that lets you turn invisible, which sounds like a video game power-up, until you find out the long-term effects. Fallout lore is blunt. Prolonged stealth boy exposure can cause severe mental deterioration, paranoia, voices, personality fractures, so you end up with a massive invisible fighter who is also mentally collapsing. It's terrifying to fight, but the tragic part is realizing they're not crazy because they're monsters. They're crazy because their brain got chewed up by survival tools, which is a very Fallout kind of cruelty. Now we need to talk about the Enclave, because if Fallout has a faction that perfectly represents the old world refusing to die, it's them. Secretive, militarized, obsessed with purity. They don't see the wasteland as humanity, they see it as contamination, and that obsession collides with FEV in the worst way. Fallout 2 includes the Enclave developing a modified FEV strain known as Curling 13, designed as a genocide weapon, not to defeat enemies, to wipe out mutated life and reshape the planet into their version of clean. And this is where super mutants become terrifying as symbolism. They are living proof of what groups like the Enclave did while preaching purity. They are receipts that breathe. So when a super mutant says they created us, that isn't poetic. That's literally the truth. Here's why the Fallout show using super mutants now is such a big deal. Because it signals that Fallout isn't just building threats, it's building themes. And the theme is clear. The apocalypse didn't end the experiments. It just moved them behind thicker doors. The show has already teased FEV as something that isn't just ancient history. And once FEV becomes an active threat again, it means something terrifying. Someone still has the recipe. And once somebody has that, super mutants aren't just monsters, they are tools of control, because FEV always comes back to the same question. Who gets to stay human, and who gets rewritten? That's the true horror, not the muscles, the decision. So what is a super mutant truly? Mechanically, a human exposed to FEV who undergoes a violent forced transformation. But thematically, a super mutant is Fallout's warning in flesh, a symbol that the worst monsters didn't evolve from radiation. They were engineered by hands in lab coats, by people who called it progress, by people who said for the greater good, and then acted shocked when the result didn't come out clean and polite. Super mutants are what happens when power stops seeing humans as sacred and start seeing them as materials, which is why they hit so hard when they speak, because a talking super mutant isn't just lore, it's Fallout holding up a mirror saying, you did this. Your kind did this. And the victims are the ones who get labeled the horror. And that's where things get really interesting. Because if the Fallout show is bringing super mutants in properly, then the story isn't just expanding, it's escalating. Because once super mutants become a real presence, the wasteland stops being humans versus monsters, and starts becoming what Fallout has always been underneath. Systems versus people. Power versus victims. History versus survivors. So here's the question. Are we heading toward a super mutant uprising, or something worse? A new FEV project, a second wave, a version of the virus refined, weaponized, controlled by someone who believes they're saving the world, while they're actually breaking it again. Drop your theory in the comments. What do you think the show is building toward? And if you love Fallout breakdowns that connect the lore, the themes, and the hidden meaning behind every reveal, hit subscribe. Because if FEV is back in play, the next reveal isn't just going to be big, it's going to be terrifying.